The boardroom was never supposed to be mine. That was Gavin's line. He'd been rehearsing it since the day our father was buried. She has absolutely no business being in this room. My brother didn't say it, he announced it. Loud enough that the stenographer in the corner actually looked up from her keyboard. Gavin was standing at the head of the long oak table. His face flushed the particular shade of red I'd been recognizing since childhood. The red that meant he'd already decided the outcome, and was now performing the decision for an audience. She is a hobbyist, she is an emotional liability. She has not contributed a single productive hour to this company in 6 years, and she sits here demanding a seat at the table like she built something. She built nothing. He swept his arm toward me like I was an exhibit. Look at her. She doesn't even own a suit that fits. I glanced down at my blazer, it fit fine. I didn't say that, I checked the time on my phone instead. 2:07 p.m., right on schedule. Gavin's financial advisor, a thin man named Clive who always smelled faintly of cigarettes, was watching me from across the table with something between confusion and dread. His eyes had drifted to a document the assistant had slid in front of him 30 seconds ago. He'd gone very still, the way people go still when they've opened an envelope they can't close again. At the far end of the table, our board chairman, Mr. Harmon, took off his reading glasses. He was 71 years old, silver-haired, and had served on this board since before I was born. He looked at Gavin the way a man looks at a car that's about to run a red light. Then he leaned forward and said very quietly, "Gavin, do you know what she actually owns? I want to tell you what happened next. But first, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's in this with me." The room held its breath after Mr. Harmon asked that question. I could hear the ventilation system humming above us. Gavin blinked, then laughed. Not a real laugh, the performative kind, the one he used whenever someone said something he thought was beneath him. "She owns 12% of a company she's never worked a day in," he said, "which after today's vote she won't own at all." He thought he was delivering the killing blow. He had no idea the knife was already in him. I looked out the window at the parking lot below. I could see Gavin's leased Escalade in the reserved spot by the entrance, the spot that used to read President but now read CEO, because Gavin had the sign changed 6 months after Dad died. That was the first thing he did. Not audit the books. Not meet with the creditors. He changed the parking sign. I thought about the last time I'd sat in this building, when Dad was still alive. We were reviewing quarterly reports. He slid a copy across the table to me and said, "You've got a better eye for numbers than anyone in this room, Tara. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." That was 11 years ago. After Dad's stroke, Gavin moved fast. I was 24, finishing my second master's degree, financial forensics, in Phoenix. Gavin was 31, local, and already had his name on the company letterhead. By the time I drove back to Charlotte, the succession plan had been quietly rewritten. Gavin was named interim CEO. The board, 4 men who'd golfed with him for years, unanimously ratified it within a week. I sat across from Gavin at the kitchen table in Mom's house the night after the vote. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You know this is better for everyone. You're not really a business person, Tara. You're an academic. It's a compliment." He smiled like he'd done me a favor. "Go finish your degree. We've got it covered." I drove back to Phoenix the next morning. I let him believe what he needed to believe. The truth was I had already started building. 3 weeks before Dad's stroke, I'd incorporated a company in Delaware, a small financial consulting firm. I called it Harlow Advisors, vague name, registered agent, no photos, no press releases. My name appeared nowhere on the public-facing materials. I had a business partner, a former professor named Dr. Emmett Kwan, who handled client-facing work while I built the infrastructure. We specialized in distressed asset analysis and small business forensic accounting. In other words, we found money that was hiding. Within 18 months, Harlow Advisors had 3 federal contracts. Within 3 years, 22 employees and a client list I can't disclose publicly. I wasn't doing it to prove anything to anyone. I did it because numbers were the one language I'd always trusted more than people. Gavin, meanwhile, was running Caldwell Construction into the ground. I knew because I checked. Every quarter, I pulled his public filings, his lien records, his contractor complaints with the North Carolina State Licensing Board. I watched him lose 2 major municipal bids in 18 months. I watched him expand into a commercial market he didn't understand and take out high-interest credit lines to cover the shortfall. By the time he was 3/4 behind on his equipment leases, I had a complete picture of where things stood. A more forgiving person would have called him. A kinder sister would have offered a referral. I thought about both of those things for about 45 seconds. Then I thought about the parking sign. I thought about the quarterly report Dad slid across this same table. I thought about Gavin's face on the night I left. relaxed, unbothered, so certain of himself that he couldn't even manufacture the courtesy to feel bad about it. I thought about the word academic said the way he said it, like it was a diagnosis. Then I thought, let's find out if he reads contracts. Harlow Advisors established a capital arm, Harlow Capital LLC, and approached Gavin's primary lender directly. The bank was delighted to transfer the risk. They sold me his outstanding credit line, a $340,000 balance at 11% interest for 60 cents on the dollar. I also acquired a secondary lien on his equipment, the excavators, the fleet trucks, the trailers, through a UCC-1 filing that Gavin's own attorney drafted without, apparently, reading. Then, through Harlow Capital, I approached Gavin's company with a refinancing package. $500,000 in fresh operating capital at a fixed 6% rate, a 2-year deferred repayment window, with his existing debt rolled in. His only obligation for the first 2 years was to maintain operations and provide quarterly financials to the lender. He signed within a week. He didn't vet Harlow Capital. He didn't Google the principals. He didn't ask for a sit-down meeting or a reference check. He saw $500,000 appear in his operating account and assumed the market had finally recognized his vision. What did he do with the first disbursement? He replaced the company's lease vehicles with purchased trucks, depreciating assets on a loan. He hired a vice president of business development at $140,000 a year, a buddy from his golf club who had never worked in construction in his life. He renovated the executive floor of this building and installed a commercial espresso machine in the break room. I know this because I have the receipts, literally. They're in a binder sitting under the table beside my right foot. He came to Thanksgiving that year in a brand new truck, talking about record revenues and the future of the company. He sat across from me and Mom at the dinner table and said, "The company is finally in great shape. Under the right leadership, it turns out these things aren't that complicated." He looked at me. "No offense, Tara, but this stuff is better left to people who've actually been in the trenches. Not everything can be solved with a spreadsheet." I said, "You're probably right." I ate my green bean casserole. He was driving a truck I held a lien on, paid for with money I had lent him. Meanwhile, over the course of 22 months, Harlow Capital had been quietly acquiring shares. Small blocks purchased from former employees who had retired, from early investors who wanted liquidity, from 2 board members who had quietly exited over the past 3 years. Every transaction was arm's length. Every price was at or above market. Every wire transfer was documented. I bought 12 blocks of shares in total, through 7 separate transactions, structured carefully enough that no single purchase triggered a disclosure requirement. No one noticed. No one thought to look, because no one thought there was anything to see. Back in the boardroom, Gavin had moved on from his theatrical opening and was now walking the other board members through a PowerPoint. Slide 4 was titled Innovative Shareholder Remediation, which is a very long way of saying he wanted to take my shares. His argument was that I had failed to engage with the company, that I had missed board meetings. There were 2 in 6 years, both of which as I attended via video, and that my stake represented a destabilizing block preventing the company from moving forward. He proposed a forced buyout at a below-market valuation he had calculated himself. Clive was still staring at the document in front of him. His hands weren't shaking yet. They would be shortly. "The bylaws provide for exactly this scenario," Gavin said, clicking to the next slide, warming to his material. "Shareholders who fit a meet participation thresholds can be subject to compulsory transfer at fair value as determined by the board." He looked at Mr. Harmon. "I'd like to call for a vote." Mr. Harmon didn't move. "Before we do that," Mr. Harmon said, "I think we need to revisit the shareholder register." Gavin frowned. "We have a current register. Our legal team prepared it last month." "It was prepared last month," Mr. Harmon agreed, "before the most recent transfer." He slid a document toward the center of the table. I recognized the formatting. I had filed it myself 48 hours ago. "According to the updated register received by this office Monday morning," Mr. Harmon said, his voice even and unhurried, "the shareholding structure of Caldwell Construction has changed materially. Harlow Capital LLC transferred 40% of its holdings, acquired through a series of private transactions over the past 22 months, to Tara Caldwell, effective as of this week." Gavin stared at the paper. His face did something I'd never seen it do before. Not at Dad's funeral, not the night of the succession vote. It went genuinely blank. He stopped. "That's not possible. Harlow Capital is an outside investor." "It was," Mr. Harmon said simply. "Who authorized that transfer?" Gavin turned to Clive. "Who authorized that?" Clive looked up. He was the color of chalk now. "Gavin." He said his name the way you say a name when you're about to tell someone something they can't unhear. "The sole managing member of Harlow Capital is..." He stopped. He looked at me across the table. It's your sister. The sentence landed like something dropped from a great height. Gavin turned to me slowly. I had never seen his face look like that. He looked genuinely lost. You, he said. Harlow Advisors, I said. We do financial forensics and distressed asset recovery. I've been incorporating Delaware entities since I was 24. You knew that. You just assumed I'd stopped. I opened the binder on the table in front of me. As of Monday, I hold my original 12% from Dad's estate and 40% transferred from Harlow Capital. That's 52% of total voting shares. I let that number sit in the air for exactly 1 second. I called this meeting, Gavin, not you. Under Section 7.4 of the corporate bylaws, majority shareholders can convene a special session with 48 hours notice. Your legal team drafted those bylaws. I'd assume you read them at some point. I watched the understanding move across his face like weather crossing a field. Disbelief first, then the frantic search for a counter-argument, then something that looked almost like vertigo. This is a setup, he said. He turned to the board members, 3 of whom were reading the documents Mr. Harmon's assistant had distributed. None of them were looking at Gavin. She's been orchestrating this is hostile. This is a hostile takeover of a family business. He pointed at me across the table. She is not an operator. She has never managed a construction project. She doesn't know what it takes to run something real. She flew in for a 2-hour meeting and now she wants to claim she built something? I looked at him calmly. He puffed up the way he always did when he felt cornered, straightened his tie, turned to the room. She's been living in Phoenix, he said. She doesn't attend events. She doesn't show up. She has never once been present for this company or this family in any meaningful way. His voice snagged slightly on the last sentence. Just slightly. But I heard it. You're going to let her walk in here on a technicality? I thought about Dad handing me a quarterly report. I thought about Gavin changing the parking sign. It's not a technicality, I said. It's the contract you signed, every one of them. Clive touched Gavin's arm. Gavin ripped away from him. I want those transfer documents challenged, he said loudly. I want a full forensic review of Harlow Capital's acquisition chain. If she used insider knowledge, if she had access to proprietary financials through some back channel, those transfers are voidable. I'll file a complaint with the SEC before end of business today. It was a decent instinct, wrong but decent. You're welcome to, I said. You'll find that every share Harlow Capital acquired was purchased through arm's-length transactions from third-party shareholders at or above market rate. The complete acquisition chain is documented. I have the wire records. I turned to Mr. Harmon. They're attached as Exhibit D in the binder. Mr. Harmon was already reading it. She used our own loan money, Gavin said suddenly. The realization moving through him. The $500,000. She funded it with capital she lent us. No, I said. Harlow Capital's share acquisitions were funded separately and predate the loan by 14 months. Different entities, different accounts, different timelines. The transactions are not related. I paused. But your attorney is welcome to review the filing dates. Todd, Gavin's attorney, quietly closed his notebook. Gavin looked at him. Tell her there's a legal argument here, Todd. There has to be an argument. Todd looked at his hands for a moment. Then he stood, gathered his things with the composed efficiency of a man who had decided this was no longer his concern, shook Mr. Harmon's hand, and walked out of the boardroom without a word to Gavin. Gavin watched him go. Something left the room with Todd, the last version of the story where Gavin was the one in control. He turned back to me, stripped of everything now. No performance, no audience management. Just a man who had spent 6 years building a structure on a lie and was feeling the foundation give. Fine. He pulled out his phone. Navigated to something with quick, certain taps. If this is how you want to play it, I have one move left you haven't thought of. He looked up and the old confidence was back, found at the bottom of desperation like a coin in a sofa cushion. Chapter 11 Reorganization. Filed right now, from this phone. Automatic stay on all asset claims. Any share transfers that occurred while the company was in financial distress can be reviewed as fraudulent conveyance under the bankruptcy code. The whole thing goes into a holding pattern. You don't get control. You don't get anything. It could sit in federal court for 2 years while our lawyers sort it out. He held up his phone. There was a filing interface on the screen. His thumb hovered. I let him have the moment. He'd earned it. Bankruptcy protection applies to the corporation, I said, not to the personal guarantor. His thumb stopped. I reached into the binder, found the tab marked Personal Guarantion 3, slid it across the table to him. When you refinanced through Harlow Capital, you signed a personal guarantee. Standard requirement for a controlling shareholder in a company this size. Clive actually flagged it during the closing, I believe. The clause states that in the event of corporate bankruptcy, all secured debt transfers to your personal estate. You guaranteed it personally, Gavin. Your name, your signature, your social security number on page 4. I tapped the line. In a Chapter 11 filing, I don't have a claim on the company. I have a claim on you. The silence that followed wasn't the polite quiet of a business meeting. It was pressurized, the kind that comes right before something gives. Gavin read the paragraph once. Then again, his lips moving slightly on the second pass. I watched him search for the gap, the exception, the clause that said unless, and find nothing there. The guarantee covers the full loan balance plus accrued interest, I said, which stands at approximately $487,000 today. It also covers the equipment lien, the fleet trucks, the excavators, the trailers, which I hold through a UCC-1 filing recorded with the Secretary of State. If you file Chapter 11 and trigger the acceleration clause, that debt becomes yours. Your house on Selwyn Avenue, your investment accounts. I looked at him steadily. The Escalade downstairs. Clive made a sound, not a word, just a sound. Todd was already gone. Gavin stared at his phone. The filing interface was still open. His thumb was still hovering. The boardroom waited. He didn't press it. I watched him decide not to press it and understood that he had, in that moment, actually run out of moves. Not tactically. Entirely. He looked up at me. What was left in his face wasn't anger. It was the specific expression of a person who has just understood, fully and without exit, that the story they were telling themselves was never true. You're going to take everything, he said. No, I said. I'm going to enforce the contracts you signed. Those are different things. I stood up and buttoned my blazer. I'm not taking the CEO position. I have no interest in running a construction company, and honestly, neither should you have at this point. I picked up my binder. Mr. Harmon's office will coordinate a search for new executive leadership. A restructuring advisor from Harlow Advisors will be embedded with the finance team for the next 90 days to assess what can be recovered. The company may survive this. That was always the point. The company can survive. Dad built something real here. I walked toward the door. The debt, though, I said without turning around, is yours personally. You should have read the guarantee. My heels clicked down the hallway, past the framed company photos on the wall, a groundbreaking ceremony from 1987, my father in a yellow hard hat, squinting into the sun, grinning like a man who had just figured something out. Past the receptionist who had worked the front desk for 19 years and who gave me a small private nod as I passed. Past the elevator, down 2 flights, out into the afternoon. I drove a 4-year-old Subaru with a small dent above the rear wheel well. I'd parked on the street 2 blocks away because I didn't have a reserved spot and I had never asked for one. That night I ate room service pasta at my hotel desk and watched the news with the volume low. My phone was quiet for almost 2 hours, then my brother called. I watched his name on the screen, let it ring. He called again 15 minutes later, then sent a long text. The kind that starts with "I can't believe you would do this to your own family," and ends with "after everything we've been through together." I read it once. Then I opened my contacts, found his name, and deleted it. Not blocked, deleted. There's a difference. Blocking means you're still managing the relationship in real time, still maintaining a boundary, still tracking it. Deleting means it's over. It means you've stopped accounting for that particular debt. Dad used to say that a bad investment isn't a loss, it's a lesson with a price tag. You pay it once and you don't go back to the same table. I wasn't angry at my brother. I want to be clear about that, because anger requires ongoing investment. It means you're still in the thing, still measuring what you're owed. I had spent 6 years building something real while Gavin spent 6 years managing an illusion, and the distance between those two activities was the entire story. Somewhere across Charlotte, a tow company was probably in the Caldwell construction parking lot. The restructuring team would be at the building by 8 the next morning. The board would convene a search committee within the week. The company might come through it. Companies sometimes do, when you strip out the deadweight and let what's actually working breathe. I'd know in about 90 days. I finished my pasta, closed the news, opened my laptop, and got back to work. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a room full of people who decided you didn't matter is nothing. Nothing at all. You just sit there, calm, and let them keep talking, and wait for the moment the math becomes something no one in the room can argue with anymore. Dad slid a quarterly report across a table once and told me I had the best eye for numbers he'd ever seen. He was right, he just didn't know how far I'd eventually take it.